Consider a spectrum of thought, with the two outer ends representing archetypically opposing ideologies, and the intermediate line representing degrees of lenience. Now, consider one end, the right end, as being the typical liberal or progressive ideology, and the left end being the typical conservative or traditional ideology. What you'll often see is that a person standing on the left end may describe the person standing on the other end to be too open-minded, and a person standing on the right end may describe a person standing on the left end to be too closed-minded. Usually, these descriptions are meant in a mocking or condescending manner. It's understandable why these descriptions are used, too. Liberalism and progressivism are both concerned with the new, the unpredictable, the unfamiliar, the dissolution of boundaries, which are all things associated with openness. On the other hand, conservatism and traditionalism are both concerned with the old, the predictable, the familiar, the enforcement of boundaries. But do you notice how open and closed are being used as relative terms here, where the degrees of open or closed-mindedness depends on where you stand on the spectrum? Let's take a step back away from our spectrum. Let's go back to basics. So, open-mindedness and closed-mindedness are differing approaches to ideas. Open-mindedness is the genuine willingness to explore, consider, and understand new ideas. Closed-mindedness is essentially the opposite. Open-mindedness is concerned with dialectic over debate, questioning over answering, understanding over assuming, and exploring over asserting. Open-mindedness in its most absolute sense is the ability to explore any idea, and I mean any idea, no matter how extreme or controversial it may seem. This ability must be complemented with a suspension of judgment on whatever matter is at hand. So to be truly open, one must not allow psychological or societal barriers to close them off to the infinite world of ideas. Two relevant quotes come to mind here. The first one is by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and it goes, "The test of a first-rate intelligence is the ability to hold two opposed ideas in the mind at the same time and still retain the ability to function." This second quote is commonly coined to Aristotle, although I'll link an interesting article down below that says that it was misunderstood and that Aristotle didn't actually say this, but I'll still share it because it explains the idea here nicely. It says, "It is the mark of an educated mind to entertain a thought without accepting it." Now obviously all of this is easier said than done. Only a small minority of people are capable of handling the intellectual rigor and existential uncertainty of absolute open-mindedness. Ideologies exist to ground people, to give them a basis on how to live their lives. It creates sanity. And thus, spectrums of thought emerge. Remember our spectrum? Can we really say that either end is open-minded? It seems not, at least not in the more absolute sense of open-mindedness. And by the way, we can substitute all sorts of ideologies to go at either end of the spectrum. It's not the labels in and of themselves that are important here. I'm talking about the fact that these spectrums exist in the first place, and how their mere existence is contradictory to the essence of open-mindedness. It is the moment one adopts any ideas on the spectrum that is the very antithesis of open-mindedness. It appears that the two ends have something major in common, and that is their closed-mindedness, actually. Rarely do you ever see a discussion between people where the intent is to reach a common overarching truth, or at the very least to change one's own mind about something. Typically it's a debate, with both sides already having made up their minds, and they put their efforts into persuasion and self-glorification, instead of genuine receptiveness. Surely they can be civil and tolerant in their conversation, but to claim that being merely civil and tolerant is synonymous with being open-minded is not quite nuanced and perhaps even problematic. People take opinions for granted. You'd be weird if you didn't have them. But opinions are flimsy unless one is able to back them on all fronts, from the physical to the metaphysical. And is anyone really able to do that? Perhaps open-mindedness can be considered like a circle with an infinite radius surrounding all spectrums of thought, since by default of its nature, open-mindedness in itself cannot be pinned down to one end. Or not. In the spirit of open-mindedness, even a video exploring its own nature like this one should be subject to scrutiny and could be thrown in the intellectual trash.